If you're having an issue with the gate lock, the very first thing we suggest is testing the gate lock itself. All you'll need is a 12-volt battery and the lock. These are the wires directly off the lock. We are going to take these two wires and touch them directly to the battery. As you notice, this retracts when we touch it to the battery. This should happen consistently every time you touch it. If it does, the lock is functional. Now you can go downstream of the lock to the lock control board if you're using that in your application, or to the output of the gate opener that is supposed to be supplying power to the lock. If you've already tested your gate lock directly to the battery and you've confirmed the gate lock itself is functional, the next step would be to test the gate lock control board if it's applicable to your installation. Not all installations use the gate lock control board, but if you do, this is the way to test it. The first terminal, or white wire, would normally be going to your gate opener control board or the operator arm. Disconnect it from the control board or the operator arm and leave all the other wires connected where they're supposed to be. Take the white wire, touch it to the positive of the battery. It should release the lock, and it should stay released as long as this is set to, which is 1 to 5 seconds. You can repeat this to make sure that it's going to work multiple times. If the gate lock tests out fine, the gate lock control board tests out fine, and the output of the gate opener tests fine, the last thing to check for is jamming of the lock. This is what it looks like when the lock is jamming. Notice this cannot pull back from the pin because there's too much pressure. There's two circumstances that cause this quite frequently. What it should normally look like when triggered is free and easy release of the latch by the pin. One reason your gate lock might not be working consistently is the pin in the gate lock might be getting stuck in the latching mechanism, preventing it from pulling back and unlocking. I'm going to remove the pin so we can see one dynamic that causes this to happen. If you'll notice, my bolts are centered on the receiving bracket right now. Sometimes people make adjustments on the receiving bracket rather than on the lock to change the position of these lining up. Let's do this. I'm moving the bolts over to the side as if I made a sliding adjustment in the bracket. When I try to put the pin back in, and engage it with the lock, you'll notice that there's a gap because it cannot sit flush. This is because the bolt heads are pushing against the metal of the lock itself. This leaves very little flexibility, and a little bit of wind can cause pressure that won't allow this pin to pull back. I'm now going to adjust the bolts to the center where they should be. They should be lined up with the pin itself. If you'll notice, now this bracket can sit flush with the gate lock. This allows more flexibility for when there is windy conditions, so if the gate is pushing one direction or the other direction, the pin inside can still pull back. This could also prevent it from latching every time. Sometimes we get calls and the customers are saying that the gate lock will not latch consistently. Sometimes it will bounce back and the pin won't go into the latch. That is another condition we see when the bolts are not lined up with the pin in the center because of the gap it creates. Another thing that can cause the gate lock to jam is if the rear face of the receiving bracket is not on a flush plane with the rear face of the gate lock. The gate lock attaches to the driveway gate. The receiving bracket attaches to a post adjacent to the driveway gate. This means the rear face of the driveway gate needs to be flush in the closed position with the rear face of the post. Now, some people have their driveway gates centered on the post, and this means they have maybe about an inch gap between the rear face of the driveway gate and the rear face of the post in the closed position. I'll show you what that looks like with these simulated blocks. The latch would be at an angle like this. This causes additional pressure and not much flexibility. This means when it's windy conditions and there's pressure against the lock, the pin inside the gate lock may not be able to pull back because it's jammed on the receiving bracket pin. When it's flush, there's more flexibility, so on windy days it can pull back fine.